Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and today we are talking about how fan fiction plays a role in keeping the fandom alive and vibrant. But before we get into all of that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Melissa and Kitty.
Hi, I'm Melissa and this is Kitty. I've been a fan since the night the pilot aired. Kitty is a latecomer to the fandom. She's only been around since 2020.
Okay. Carole?
Hi, I'm Carole Stokes. I've been a fan since season 3. I started writing fan fiction for the Supernatural fandom in 2012, and and currently am an MM romance writer under the name Alice Stokes.
Colton.
Nope, I don't think that's your name.
Alice Colton.
Oh God. Okay, so this panel is going to be like that, is it?
Yep.
Yep. And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. But all my worlds are ones where Sam and Dean could walk in and feel right at home. I fell in love with the show halfway through season 12. Halfway through season 11, binge watched 11 seasons in time for season 12, and then fell into the, wonderful abyss of supernatural fan fiction. I don't write supernatural fan fiction, but in the past, I wrote fanfic for a variety of fandoms, including Star Trek and the New Avengers and a couple others. So, and I'm a dedicated fan fiction reader. So that leads me to tonight's topic, which is the intersection between fan fiction and the fandom itself, which is comprised of everything from the official shows, the conventions, the appearances, the stars, all of that, and the people who love the show. That's all of the fandom. But in there, fan fiction keeps us going with new adventures or new insights. So what role let's start with, what do you think the relationship is for fan fiction with the fandom at large? Melissa?
Wait, ask it again because Kitty was trying to lick my knee.
It is going to be one of those.
It is. Mercury must be in retrospect or something.
The relationship between fanfic and the fandom?
What do you think the relationship is between fan fiction in its broadest sense and the supernatural fandom?
So it's like a driver, right? It's like this infinity loop, because fanfic, there are fans who come to the fandom because they read some Tumblr Natural or some other version of fanfic, and so then they come to the show. Then you've got folks who watch, like me. I watched the show from the night it aired, but I was relatively late coming to the fanfic world. You and Carole are responsible for me reading fanfic, because it's Gail was like, here, read this, and I read this, and then here, read this, and then I found Carole, and I was like, oh my god. So I think that they can drive each other, right? It's like this infinity loop, and it's a great thing.
Okay, Carole?
I think for me, they're just so intertwined, because I did read fanfic in other fandoms prior to Supernatural. So I was already aware of the fan fiction world and enjoying the fruits thereof. So when I came to Supernatural, I had missed the first 2 seasons, and I started in season 3, largely intrigued because they kept talking about Dean's final year. And I thought, oh my God, does he have cancer? Like, what is this? Because I had missed the whole thing of why he only had a year. And so I had to watch because I was like, why does he only have a year? And then, of course, got completely, caught up in it and stuff. So season 3 ended really abruptly because of the writer's strike at that time.
Mhm.
And left hanging, I thought to myself, I was reading fan fiction for these other media and properties and stuff. I bet there's fan fiction for Supernatural.
Oh dear.
And yes, there was. And so I started reading it from that point on, and it was only a couple of years later that I started writing it. So for me, fan fiction is a firmly planted area of fandom, and it to me it continues growing right alongside the fandom. Um, and are we going to talk about like
Oh, we'll get,
posts? Okay, because I don't want to get into other stuff that we're going to get into, but yes, it's a really big vital part of fandom for me.
you know, take a wayback machine here for a minute. When I first got into writing fan fiction, and this would have been in the late 1970s, um, there wasn't an internet. There wasn't an archive of our own. We had newsletters. We had fanzines that somebody, you know, took to a copy shop and Xeroxed and then mailed out to the people who sent them money for postage. And um, that was kind of how we got by for series that weren't in production anymore. And at conventions, people would go to a room and there'd be a whole stack of fanzines. And we would sit in a line around the wall and you would take one, read it, pass it down. Take one, read it, pass it down. Very primitive, I know, but we were desperate for content and that was the only way we could share it. So coming into the internet age with Tumblr and Archive of Our Own and so many other places where you can find great fanfic, and it's just there. You don't have to have it mailed to you. Um, this is an abundance of riches. But I think something to keep in mind is that in any fandom, there are kind of layers of fans. There's the casual fan. They've seen it, they liked it, they watched it once, and they moved on. It was okay. Then there's the people who have watched it maybe a couple of times, but still not enough to be able to quote things and share all the memes. And they're fans, but they're not obsessed fans. And you keep going in layers of people who really have found something deeply meaningful to themselves in the show, something that sustains them, something that has given them hope, something that has made a deep emotional resonance. And we're the folks who've watched the show multiple times all the way through, go to the conventions, sprinkle supernatural quotes in pretty much every conversation, and either create or consume fan fiction because we've already seen all the canonical stuff. And so, the casual fan, it's just another show that was on the air and it left the air and they liked it while it was there, but yeah, might catch a rerun, but that's all it is to them. And then you have the other folks who are constantly looking for new interpretations, new connections, new insights, new stories, because the show is that meaningful to them. So, kind of talk about the types of stories that we find in fan fiction. And yes, there are spicy ones. We may leave that, just set over on the corner over here. Yeah, I know. We'll just say there is spicy stuff. But
The
in
rest is
general,
up to you.
yeah, it's well marked. You can find it if you're looking. But what types of stories do people keep telling for a show that has now been off the air for 5 years? Melissa, you're muted.
It really is that kind of night tonight. Sorry, folks. Before I dive down my rabbit hole for this, I want to say fan fiction is fine. Shipping is fine. Your ship may not be my ship, but your ship is fine. But
Define shipping.
but shipping is when you try to create a romantic relationship between two characters where none exists or where it doesn't exist yet in canon. I am all for whatever rocks your boat in terms of fan fiction. I might not read it, but you're welcome to write it. But I will say that it is never appropriate to bring your fan ship to the actors, especially at a con. That is a huge pet peeve. Like, I don't care what, imagine all in your head, tell the stories, get excited about reading stories about that, but don't enforce that point of view on an actor. That's not ever cool. And because we've been like down the rabbit hole hard and deep about going to cons and watching all the con videos. I know, and I'm off on a tangent, but I was thinking about this earlier today. Like, that's not a cool thing to do. The kinds of stories that you do see are ships, people thinking that character A and character B should be together. And there's all these, some of them I look at and go, I don't know how you got there, but okay, cool. I'm going to be over here reading something that I like. But that is a big piece of fanfic and fanon. People, like, back before I found, back in the Lost days when there was still LiveJournal, that was a big thing. And I was in all these different LiveJournal conversations about, character A and character B, and did we, what do we think? And that was a big thing. And that was really, for me, my first experience of fandom past what was on the screen. And that was exciting and interesting. So that's a big piece of fanfic.
Okay, Kara?
I do want to just point out that while certainly I know the three of us read a lot of shipping stories, not everything is shipping. There are plenty of stories in every fandom that do not have shipping at all. So if you don't want any romance in it, it's out there still too. So don't think, oh no, I don't want to have to read some romance in it. It's out. It doesn't matter. That's out there too. And the definition of shipping itself is just so wide because it could be to heterosexual characters, to gay characters, a human and an alien, to aliens. It could be planets. It could be in the one famous fiction where it's two desk lamps in the bunker. So,
Brilliant.
When we say that, there's just everything out there under the sun. When Gail was talking about going through leading up to the end and then how fan fiction now continues going past the end of the show, as the show continued on, we saw fan fiction constantly evolving because canon was constantly growing and changing. So we didn't know really about John for a little while. We didn't know about Castiel for a while. We didn't know about Angels and Demons for a while. We didn't know about Hell for a while, like how is Hell structured? The boys came across the bunker. All of these developments in the show constantly then created new generational layers, we'll say, of fan fiction, because all of a sudden the writers had all this new canon to play with, build on, etc., etc. And so as the canon world grew, the fan fiction world exploded every time with this new information and everything. I will point out also that a couple of the big divides in fandom when you're talking about the kinds of stories is you have stories that work within the canon structure. So those are called non-AUs, non-alternate universes. And those are stories that play strictly by the rules in the canon medium, in this case, supernatural. Sam and Dean and everybody else in the show is as you see them. Now, at that point, they may begin to develop and grow beyond the canon material. We saw in the show how Sam was developing witchy capabilities and was being, fostered a little bit by Rowena, and she left him all her witchy stuff and all of this. So in fanfic, you'll find stories where we're starting at that point, but then Sam continues to grow as a witch and so forth. The other big category will be your alternate universe stories, or AU. And those are the stories where it's no holds barred. They might be on Earth, they might be on the moon, they might be somewhere else, they might be uh, in something never contemplated. They might be in a world with no magic. They might be in a world with all magic. They might be in a world, that literally the possibilities are endless. If
Yeah.
you can imagine it, somebody may probably have already written a fic about it or influenced by it. And so between those two categories, you just have these vast arenas for which fanfics to play out in. And some people really have a preference. Some people really like the non-AU because they like just the universe that Supernatural is portraying. Other people like the AUs and the creativity. So maybe the Impala is a spaceship and Sam and Dean are, space pilots. Which Melissa disagrees with, but I'm just saying it could be a story.
Yeah, it's funny because once you start reading fanfic, you definitely have tastes. Like, I don't like the space stuff because I'm not a real big space story fan. So I see those and go, it's my favorite author, but I'm gonna slide on past. And that's the beauty of fanfic. Sorry, Carol, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, absolutely. That's just, exactly it. You may like a story where Sam and Dean are real cowboys, not just visiting like in Frontierland. And so all of those worlds are out there, for you to explore as a reader and as a writer if you're writing.
Well, and I think there is pardon the background noise. There's the idea of additional episodes, additional content. So it is written in the canonical world, but here are extra episodes as fan fiction stories. And then, as Carol mentioned, you get the ones that are a little off the beaten track, what ifs. And you get the shipping. But one of the other things that's very big, because not everything is a big long story, you also get the extra moments. Not we'll get to fix it fiction in a minute, but these are the extra moments that, an episode's only 42 minutes long. There's only so much room. There's in the script, only so much time on the air. And there's they never ended up talking about that. Well, what about X? And hate to say it, but I think you can tell that an awful lot of fan fiction is written by women because they write these conversations that the men didn't have. Because the men needed to have the conversation. And so the women wrote it for them. Here, now it's fixed. And, but it is also the kind of thing that would have naturally happened if two people in real life had those experiences. They probably would have gotten around to it at some point, and we want to see that closure.
Yeah.
And then the other type of episodes, and this is beyond the AU of the Impala's a spaceship, is where we look at real people fiction, which is it's not Sam and Dean, it's Jared and Jensen. So Jared is a mob boss and Jensen is a card sharp at the Vegas hotel that Jared owns. And, or they really are FBI agents. And they're not Sam and Dean. So that, and that tends to bring in the cast of every show they've ever been on. So that gets really interesting really fast. So that, those are some other flavors of fan fiction that's out there, in addition to what we've talked about so far. But then there's the fix-it fiction. And there was a very vibrant conversation on somebody's wall this week on Facebook pro and con with the idea of um, maybe, okay, so spoilers, it's been 5 years. In the last episode of Supernatural, Dean dies, and then many years later, Sam dies, and they're reunited in heaven. But some people said, I don't want them. I don't want it to end there. So they wrote a story where Dean doesn't die, or something different happens. And there were some pretty strong opinions in that thread about no, you're violating the author's, characters to it's not really published. Why can't we write whatever makes us happy? Um, and everything in between. So, and I think one of the biggest fix it fictions in supernatural history is the voicemail. Um, so Melissa, what do you think about fix-its?
I love fix-its, and I think it was Stephen King, although I could be misattributing the quote. Like, your interpretation, your fanfic or the movie interpretation doesn't change what's in the book, and the fanfic doesn't change what's on the screen. That is canon. That is solid in cement, unless they decide to retcon it when they get around to season 16, and we're not going to go any retcons, but it's there. So I love fix-its because it's a really creative way to solve a problem that was bugging me. For me, the Samulet, that drove me bonkers. And I've never met a Samulet fic that I wouldn't read, even if it was not my taste. I read it anyway. Like, it could be a Samulet fix-it in outer space with dinosaurs, and I'm reading it because
And that, of course, is where Dean threw away the amulet that was the, uh, representation of their brotherly bond. And then how did Sam get it back to give it to him later? And therein lies a tale.
but the fix-it fictions are just great because they take these beats that happened in a show that the writers, for a bunch of reasons, because there's never been a TV show on the air that didn't have moments where something needed to go back and get fixed, and it never was, and it drives the fans crazy. These fix-it fictions give the writers the chance to work through how they would have wanted it done, and it gives the readers a chance to like get that taste, that satisfying, oh, okay, here's what really happened, here's the whole thing. And it's just, they are a gift to any fandom.
Okay, Carol?
So I totally agree. Canon is immutable. It's there. It's stone. Nothing's going to change it, affect it. So really, the author's vision, his characters, and all of that are perfectly preserved. Nothing has happened to them in the original medium, whether it's book, movie, etc. So for me, a fix-it fic is really it's just a fic. It's just like any other fic where you have decided to explore something for whatever reason that has intrigued you. In this case, perhaps a dangling thread, or, something like the famous voicemail, because clearly Sam heard something that Dean didn't say. And they never address, the fact of letting Sam find out that Dean really didn't say that, or Dean finding out that Sam heard something terrible, you know.
Mhm.
So
It's
yeah,
heavily implied that the angels messed with it, but they never
they
come
never
clean out
really
and say it.
concretely state it. And so that's the kind of story that begs to be told, you know. Um, but it's just a story like any fanfic story is. I kind of look at fanfic sometimes like, let's say you have the show in front of you, and if you could like touch the screen, and something that's really tiny magnifies, and so something that's only like a cell or two on the screen suddenly turns into like several cells, that like movie cells, the
Mhm.
little, is that the right word?
Mhm.
Yeah, that it blossoms into like this whole big thing that's your story. So from a 30-second moment or a 10-second moment, all of a sudden you can hold your finger down and watch this thing you know, blossom. Um, the next thing, my next analogy is where you have so many points where we're going down the road and Sam and Dean took a 45-degree turn to the right. Well, what if they took a 50-degree? What if they took a 45-degree turn to the left? What if they turned around and went back the way they came? Every single one of those is an axis for a story. And you know, and fix it, fix again are just part of that. I think it's more labeled because people who have an issue of a thing that they're not fond of, like the voicemail, or you know, perhaps the whole, you know, Dean dying as he did, and they want him to last longer, or Sam dies with him, or whatever. So whatever moment they would like to recreate in a more enjoyable way, you know, for themselves and whoever would like to read it. Um, but it's just a category, just like a curtain fic, where we see characters retire from their active duty. You know, Sam and Dean retire from being hunters. Jared and Jensen retire from being actors. Um, it's just another label for another style of fic, but in no way does it, I feel, uh, mess with the original vision, the original characters, because those are still there in their little amber prison, well, not prison, but their little amber world, you know, that will never, never, never be changed. Uh, so, you know, if you're already exploring things, there's no harm in exploring things to see, well, what if Sam and Dean do find out about the voicemail? What if Sam and Dean do die together? What if they're, you know, it's all to me just part of the deliciousness of building these fictional worlds and exploring these relationships and circumstances in a way that the show couldn't do, didn't do, certainly didn't have time to do, and exercise your own imagination as a writer, as a reader, uh, to frolic about and explore these really fascinating uh, new stories.
Well, I think everybody who's ever written anything knows that at any sentence or paragraph break, things could go in different directions. And you are constantly playing the game of, you know, what comes next. Choose your own adventure is pretty much, whether you're writing a report or you're writing a story, that's a line by line, paragraph by paragraph choice. And so, yes, saying, well, what are the roads not taken? Well, what would have happened if they, what would have happened if they had never met angels? What would have happened if Sam had never gone to hell? You know, so many possibilities. But I want to touch on the issue of dying, not dying, because in the very long and well argued, but varied points of view, um, online discussion, there were some really strong feelings around writing stories where characters died in canon, and fan fiction changed that ending and either had them not die that way, not die then, not die at all. To the point where there were some people arguing that this was indicative of the fact that the fan fiction authors had difficulty processing grief. And yeah, they went far afield on doing their own little psychological explanation of people they'd never met. And I don't think that's it at all. The argument I gave on the thread was that fans become very, very emotionally connected to favorite characters. And especially if they're encountering a show at a problematic, difficult time in their life, these characters um, become friends, become a lifeline. And so maybe at this time, if you're processing heavy stuff, maybe you can't handle losing your favorite character too. You need that favorite character. So you write additional adventures where that doesn't happen to them. I think there are just as many fan fictions where somebody has lost someone they love to cancer, so they write a story about Sam having cancer.
Mhm.
That is therapeutic too. I won't read it, but if it helps you, go for it. So I think that the ultimate fiction fanfics of They Didn't Die is just that same sort of exploration of I love this character. They are in some way emotionally sustaining me. I don't want to let go of them. And I want to see them have a happily ever after. It doesn't change anything for anybody else. Um, thoughts on like why people write, how people get into this, Carol? And also, what is it? We haven't had any new supernatural other than the cons for 5 years. So what place in the fandom does the fan fiction serve to keep us all getting new stuff? Carol?
I definitely with the whole writing thing. So as I said, I had read other fandoms and then I read Supernatural for a year or so and then thought, aha, I have stories, fermenting. um, Definitely. And I think this is any writer in any field, not just fan fiction, any writer is going to be utilizing some of their own experiences at some point. Everything that is written from a person is going to have come through the filter of their experiences. Does it mean a blow by blow thing? Absolutely not. But um, if I have lived in China, then that experience is going to color my writing, and perhaps I will have small Chinese influences, or perhaps I will have a story set in China, or perhaps, I'll do a Firefly crossover because they had all the Chinese mixed in with their culture.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's a given. We can't not have our own experiences, even if we deliberately set out to write a story completely opposite to everything that we are. The fact that we're doing that is yet part of being filtered through our experience. Because we don't do X and we are writing X, that itself is going to infuse our writing.
Mhm.
So, as far as then processing things, again, absolutely. The filter thing is just everything. But having been through particular traumas, let's say, or particular joys, it doesn't even have to be a trauma thing, it can be a joy thing. If you've had this tremendously joyful experience, at some point you may want to use that in your writing, either little bits of it here and there, or a whole story about it. Um, People who have chronic illnesses, are going to infuse that sense of the awareness of the physicality of the characters, whether it be more than the actual writer's capabilities or reflecting the fact that the writer works within these limitations because of their chronic illness, physical, mental, whatever. Um, and that's actually part of what flavors writing so deliciously. If everybody didn't have those varied experiences, those varied responses, writing would be so flat and bland. But it's because of these things that we are presented such the varied landscape, that we are. I'm sorry, what was the other part of the question?
No, that's good. Melissa?
Um, I almost wasn't going to be able to answer this, and then I had to take a step back. So I write RPF drabbles, RPF real person fiction drabbles, 100 to 300 word things on a page. They are not published on AO3. Why do I write them? Because there are 4 people plus me that are amused by them. I have a very limited audience. It is only shared with literally 4 people. I write them for myself, and I write them for the 4 people who read them, because they're fun. It's fun to throw some words on a page and have everybody go, ha ha ha, that's hilarious, or oh, you got it. That's a hoot. And that's part of why people write fan fiction, because when you listen to fan fiction is free, right? So you pay for it by on AO3, leaving kudos, leaving comments. If you're reading on LiveJournal, leaving those comments, telling the author, hey, I really like this. Hey, I really enjoyed this. That's money in the bank to those fanfic writers, because we're not paying for it. So, and that really is a boost, right? When you write something, when I write something for my audience and they say, hey, that was really good. That's a real gas. That's a huge feeling. And I'm going to circle back to what you had said about the whole conversation about fiction fic, fix it fic, and authors like dealing with their own grief, processing their own grief. My point is, and because we talked about this extensively the night of the finale, and then and lots since the finale, about how grieving over characters that we loved is legitimate. It is not invalid. It is a legitimate way. Feeling how you feel is legitimate. And, you know, I was unhinged that night, and I actually talked to Gail, because back then we had that small group from the Facebook page where we were on a call after that show aired, and I was just beside myself because I hated the ending, because I didn't want Dee to die. And you and some other people in the chat were kind of like help me work through my initial problem. But still, I still grieve Dean. I'm still sad that he died the way he died. I think it was a great ending, but it's still a hole in my heart. And so if people write fiction to help them cope with whatever it is they're going through, or to celebrate whatever they want to celebrate, rock on. I might not read it, but that does not take anything away from the validity of the writing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, kind of cycling back to the idea of how fan fiction and fandom keep the properties alive when they aren't currently making more episodes. This is exactly how. This is, there are new stories. If you want to read new stories, you can read new stories. If you just want to watch the 325 episodes over again for the umpteenth time, that's okay too. But if you want something a little different, if you wonder, roads not taken, fan fiction is there for you. And it's kind of like the conventions. We are very fortunate that for a show that is no longer on the air, we are getting multiple conventions every year, in the United States and elsewhere. But just in the US, maybe not every month, but quite a few months of the year, we get conventions with most of the cast. And a lot of times things come up through the questions that give us insight into something that went on behind the scenes that informs why something on the screen went the way it did. Mm-hmm. And those tidbits to me are related to the extra stuff that we get from fan fiction, because this is something we didn't know about. This is new content. This is something that when we go back and watch canon, we kind of have some extras in our mind, and that doesn't hurt anything, and it only helps. So I don't have an issue with any of that, and I think that we're very fortunate at having such an active fandom that has certainly not every space, but many safe spaces online with people who are legitimately and deeply in love with the show, where we can find our tribe and interact. We have the conventions. And if you can't get to the conventions, a lot of times the content is on YouTube later on. And we have multiple places to get fan fiction. So for a show that at the moment, we all hope will be coming back at some point, but at the moment is not, it's kind of an embarrassment of riches. We have a lot going for us out there as a fandom.
I want to comment on something you had said earlier too about as far as the real person fix and utilizing all the other shows that that person was was on. So, for instance, for Jensen, you know, we have Smallville, we have Dawson's Creek. Well, no, not too many people draw from that, but Smallville, that cast was utilized quite a bit. Um, and
Christian and Steve.
I'm sorry.
Christian and Steve too, even though they weren't on shows together.
Right. So
You
they
see
have
them
all these
pop
other
up.
people, you know, that we and the two things I was first of all, they kept joining new shows. So all of a sudden we had the characters from Walker. We had the characters from The Boys. We had characters from Big Sky. And now we're gonna get we have, you know, new characters because they kept getting on new shows. You know, Jensen's got a new show coming out. Well, we'll see what those characters, you know. So that really also kind of kept things fresh and moving on. And when I say characters, really, it's not even just the real people because, you know, Soldier Boy will show up in a fic. Walker will show up in a fic.
Sometimes
So
together
it's sometimes together, absolutely.
with dinosaurs.
So between the actors and the characters themselves, they keep adding kind of new dimensions that can factor into this. And as a side note, I have to say, I had read so many stories that had characters I was not familiar with that were all from One Tree Hill that I finally one day said, I gotta watch this because there's all these people I hear about I see in these fanfics, you know, and I don't know who they are. So I ended up watching the whole thing of One Tree Hill because it sucked me in like any good soap does. And just because these names kept turning up in stories, I'm like, who is this person? Who is that person?
Melissa?
Related, true facts. Tom Welling and Mike Rosenbaum feature in a lot of fanfic, supernatural RPF fanfic, a lot. I never watched the show. I have no interest in the show. I'd never seen the show. I didn't know what these guys look like. And Gail and I are at a supernatural convention in DC. And these two happen to be at the convention. I have no idea why, but they were there. And so we, you know, and Gail wants to go to the panel. I don't know who these turkeys are, but I'm going to go. And we're sitting there, and Mike Rosenbaum starts talking. And Welling is sitting there next to him, not able to get a word in edgewise. Now, if you read fanfic, Tom Welling is often, at least in the ones I read, portrayed as a super hot guy. He could be an evil guy, he could be a good guy, but he's always, like, almost always described as a super, super hot guy. So I'm sitting there watching the panel, and this is nothing against Mike Rosenbaum, but Mike Rosenbaum's will talk a handle off a teapot. He won't let Tom get a word in edgewise. At least that's what it seems to me. So I get up to the mic to ask my question. I just looked at Tom Welling and I said, you know, in all the supernatural related RPF fanfic I read, you were always billed as the hot guy. Now I get it. And I walked away. And if I had not, and poor Tom is standing there going, what's your question? And Rosenbaum gets my point, and he's like, nah, man, she dropped the mic on that one. And if I hadn't read fanfic, I would have probably been bored out of my mind in that panel because I didn't watch the shows, but I was like, oh, I see why they portray Mike the way they do in fanfic. And I see why they portray Tom the way they do in fanfic. And so, yeah, fanfic can be such a mind-broadening experience.
In many, many ways. Well, folks, we are out of time. So you want to say where we can find you online, or if you just have a last comment to make, it's closing time. Carole, last word.
You can find me on Facebook in the Continual group and the Supernatural Team Free Will group that Gail runs. As Ellis Colton, you can find me all over social media. Go to elliscolton.com. And all my links are there, my newsletter, and links to my books, including a little paranormal romance called The Case of Thistledown House.
Okay. Melissa?
You can find Kitty and I here on Continual, and you can find me occasionally with one or both of you at Creation Supernatural Cons. I'm the one with the purple hair.
I'm pretty easy to find at gailcmartin.com, morganbryce.com. If you spell them right, you'll find me on all the social media sites. I do run the Supernatural TFWNC group. We do weekly Supernatural panels here on Continual. And so I'm pretty easy to find out there. Folks, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, my wonderful panelists, for being here with us tonight. There will be more Supernatural panels coming up soon, so we'll see you online.